Okay, let's talk about body temperature regulation. So the functions of the skin are listed below, and this is the portion that we're focusing on right now. Okay, so what happens in hot heat, right? We sweat. We normally sweat about 500 milliliters, right, which is not noticeable. And then we have more noticeable sweat during exercise for cooling. In a cold external environment, we have the opposite. We don't sweat, but we have blood vessel constriction, so vasoconstriction. And what that does is it shunts the blood from the periphery, so your fingertips and toes, towards the heart, the organs, right? And so you're trying to, in a cold external environment, keep the internal organs in a homeostatic control at a proper temperature. So you're going to bring the heat inward, and then in heat, the external environment, in hot weather, you're going to keep cooling off the system to draw heat away from the internal organs, right? So we don't want our organs to be too hot, so we sweat. We don't want them to be too cold, so we vasoconstrict. So with excessive heat, we can increase our heart rate to move well, we don't consciously increase it, but our heart rate will increase to move blood to the periphery. And again, that's a shunting away from the organs to the toes and to the fingertips, towards the hands and feet, right? So our feet get hot, our hands get hot, and then the heat that was around our heart, our liver, and all our glands is going to dissipate. So this is vasodilation, right? So you would have the dermal vessels, so more superficial vessels would be getting larger, and then the deeper vessels would be constricting, right, to mechanically push the blood away from the body. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the 4 different mechanisms that we can maintain our thermoregulation, or maintain the temperature we want in our body. So in regards to having too much heat, the way we're going to get heat away from the body is through radiation. And this is just like when you have heat that is lifting from the skin's surface into the air. So it simply moves from a area of higher concentration to lower concentration. So if you think about the radiator in your home, where the heat comes out during the winter, and that heat, the heat source is that metal piece that you have on the wall, and then the air is colder around it, so the heat moves from that warmer area to that colder area. So you can imagine that this wouldn't work well if your house was 100 degrees and you put on the heat. You wouldn't be moving much of the heat away from the radiator surface, right? So it would be staying there. Another way to think about this is that is when you turn off the heat. So I turn the heat on to 70 degrees, and it's 50 degrees in the house. The radiator will keep pumping that heat out, but when I turn off the system, right, the radiator itself cools as that heat moves into the home. What's conduction? So this is when we use something to physically get the heat to come away. So if you were to drink a cool glass of water, right, the water itself would draw the heat away from the body. You can imagine that too with an ice pack, right, that you're moving the hot molecules towards the colder molecules. Convection is simply using wind, right? Using fans to provide an air current that will move the heat away from the body. And evaporation is when it changes from a water form to a gas form. And in that process, it takes away the excessive heat. In a dry desert environment, okay, you wouldn't necessarily sweat water droplets on the surface of your skin, and you would only really notice that you had been sweating because you would be covered in salt, like at the end of your exercise routine. In a humid environment, you would have even more moisture building up on the surface of your skin. The evaporation rate would go down because there's a high concentration of water in the air already. So the water has a tougher time converting to the gaseous state. When in this desert environment, right, because the air is hot and dry, it can convert because you're moving from an area of like a water high concentration on the surface of the body um, to that dry air, right, with no water in it. Yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. I want to say that um, hot and humid. There's an essay question on this for the exam. So I want to just fully suss it out to see if there's anything else that's really important about it. Just when you're answering the question, just think of moving from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So depending on the concentration of water in the air, that'll affect your evaporative cooling abilities. So when we, so I just want to show the vessels here in the periphery, right? Here's some, so you'd have vasodilation in the periphery, and then evaporative cooling would be coming off the surface of the skin. Oh, and let me just point out the sweat pores. So right, we knew about the sweat glands here, and that they would come out through the pores, and that would be how you are doing your sweating and evaporative cooling. All right, metabolic function. Remember, metabolism is a chemical process requiring energy. So we're talking about synthesizing vitamin D here, but remember the glands also create hormones, the chemical messenger, and to do that, they need energy. So I'm only referencing that so that when you see metabolism, we often think about like eating food and then digesting it quickly, or like grabbing the energy from it quickly, which is one metabolic function, but there's more. So like for example, the skin will metabolize vitamin D, and that's how you'll absorb calcium into the intestine. So this is simply a function of the skin, which is why we're talking about it now. We just talked about how skin does thermoregulation, and now I'm just mentioning here that also is really important for vitamin D absorption. Or calcium absorption due to the vitamin D hormone, which we get from the sun, or when we're low on it, we might use supplements. This is also important, vitamin D. You're going to be less likely to have vitamin D levels adequately supplying your body with what they need if you live in a dense urban environment where you don't have access to the sun, so inner city kind of thing, or if you're in an unsafe place where you can't play outside, so you don't get outside to do activities, that would also increase vitamin D deficiency. So if you think globally, that could be an issue. What else about vitamin D is that you actually absorb more the lighter the skin you have. So the darker the skin you have, the melanin will prevent the vitamin D absorption. And what that means is that if you're of darker skin, right, it's even more important to have vitamin D exposure or supplement. What you do is like 15 minutes. 15 minutes is all you need. So it's not about playing baseball outside for 3 hours to get your vitamin D intake. It's really 15 minutes on the hands and face would be enough to get the proper amount of vitamin D. Okay, so yeah, so we've looked at collagen in our tissues and how that gets excreted from the cells. Um, yeah, it prevents wrinkles. It gives a healthy integrity to the skin. Okay, so this is skin disease, which is coming up next.